I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it. I also told him that it was important that this cancer be removed immediately because it was growing more deadly every day.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Well, if you ask many historians, if it wasn't for John Dean's testimony before the Senate Watergate Committee in 1973, Richard Nixon might never have resigned. That's what makes Paul Manafort's plea agreement with special counsel Robert Mueller so significant, since it now seems that those closest to Trump are now turning on him. Trump's former campaign manager joins 4 other people with connections to the Trump campaign who have pleaded guilty. And Manafort is the latest person in Trump's orbit to cooperate or be willing to cooperate with the Russia investigation. Overall, 7 people have admitted to or been convicted of 24 criminal counts linked to the Mueller probe or to the campaign. Another 26 people and 3 businesses, all in Russia or Ukraine, have been indicted by the Mueller grand jury. All of it showing the overwhelming force of Mueller's probe just over a year into the investigation. Joining me now, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Elliot Williams, Karine Jean-Pierre, Senior Advisor for MoveOn.org, Jonathan Capehart, host of the new national call-in radio show, America on the Line on WNYC, and Washington Post opinion writer Jennifer Rubin. Thank you all for being here. Jennifer, I'm going to start with you on the end. Vanity Fair has an extraordinary piece out by Gabriel Sherman that reports that Trump believes there's a coup taking place against him. Then it was triggered by the anonymous New York Times op-ed. He sees enemies everywhere. And here's an interesting line from it. Besides family, according to this piece, one of the only people Trump continues to trust is Stephen Miller. The op-ed has validated Miller's view, which is also Steve Bannon's view, that there is an administrative state out to get Trump. A Republican close to the White House said there's a coup and not a slow-rolling or concealed coup, Bannon told the writer, which is Gabriel Sherman. It's interesting that they see an administrative state coup when the people turning on him are his people, his lawyer, his campaign manager, his people, not the administrative state.
Right. I think there are 2 things going on simultaneously. One is, as you say, Joy, everybody is turning on him. Aside from his children, there's really no one left in the inner circle. Imagine, for example, if Hillary Clinton had had her national security advisor, her campaign chief, her deputy campaign chief, her personal lawyer all indicted. At that point, there would be an assumption, there would be an absolute conclusion that she had been up to no good. At the very least, of course, he's hired a bunch of crooks. So there's that is going on, and he considers, remember his sense of loyalty. It's like the mob. You never turn. You never snitch. Simultaneously, what's going on is that New York Times op-ed, which is that there are a bunch of people putting their fingers in dikes, trying to keep the wave from washing the country out to sea. So in some sense, he's right. They all are out to get him. Even paranoids have enemies. The problem is it's all due to him. He's brought this on himself.
Yeah, and Jonathan Capehart, biographers of Trump and Trump whispers, people who've been around him a lot, say that, cornered, he's actually even more erratic and more out of control. So I wonder what this ends up looking like, as not just this op-ed freaks him out and the fact that people who he doesn't know are in their own minds working to undermine him and stop him from doing the things they don't like, other than cutting taxes, but that now you actually have his consigliere turning state's evidence, his former campaign chairman, people who really could know about crimes that had to do with his election turning on him.
People who know maybe not just about crimes, but who can give a very clear insight into his thinking, his motivations, just who he is. And I think between Manafort and also his personal financial guy, I think that's Alan Weisselberg, plus David Pecker, these are people who have been involved with President Trump, but more importantly, citizen Donald Trump, and all of these catch and kill stories and other sort of nefarious things that Donald Trump did as a private citizen that are all manifesting themselves now that he is in the Oval Office. The idea that a president who acts more like the head of a crime family, who puts family first, and is now relying on the counsel of a white nationalist who is on his staff, is something that just in general should really concern people. But the fact that all of these people who are close to him have now decided to cooperate with the special counsel only serves to make a paranoid, narcissistic president even more insular. And we've already seen how dangerous that can be. Just ask the American citizens who live in Puerto Rico about what it's like to have a president who has no moral core, no sense of empathy, and now here he is feeling vulnerable, isolated, and relying on his family and the one person he thinks isn't out to get him.
Yeah, and I mean, Karine Jean-Pierre, we've seen, we have something like 12,000 children in federal custody, migrant children in federal custody. The idea, I think Jonathan's point, is a paranoid Donald Trump who's only listening to the guy who is ginning him on to cage children feels like an even more sort of dangerous situation for vulnerable people. If he's going to lash out, that's who he's lashing out at.
Yeah, and Stephen Miller is incredibly dangerous. Remember, Stephen Miller comes out of the camp of Jeff Sessions, who, as Attorney General, Jeff Sessions is incredibly dangerous. And every policy that we see coming out of Stephen Miller, coming out of the Attorney General's office, has hurt the most vulnerable among us. And right now we're talking about, as you mentioned, the families who are crossing the border, immigrants who have to pay, the consequences for such an evil man in the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, sitting behind the Resolute desk, who decides that they are not worthy. And if you are not like him, if you are not wealthy, white, straight, then you do not belong here. We don't want you here. He wants people from Norway. So this is what we have in this president right now. And we've had that for the last, clearly, almost 20 months. And this is, once again, Joy, I have to say this is why we have to come out in November and really put a stop on this runaway administration.
Yeah, it is quite a thing. Let me bring in my prosecutor here, Elliot Williams. So you have Manafort now pleading out. Donald Trump's only response to that, per the Wall Street Journal, was his only comment was, "I got hit with an artificial witch hunt that should never have happened," was his response to that. But at the same time, it felt for a while like the way this was going was that Manafort was holding out, not cooperating in the hopes of a pardon. The Politico reports that the pardon impact now could be lessened by the fact that that Manafort has now turned state's evidence. And it says here it says in that story, two new factors appear to stymie the impact of a potential Trump pardon for Manafort. The first is that Manafort is already talking, and the second is that Manafort managed to get concessions. That Mueller managed to get concessions from Manafort that limit the value of any pardon. What kind of concessions could that be? Is that because he has to keep cooperating as long as Mueller wants him?
Right. The extent of the cooperation actually has to be valuable. Now, back to this pardon point, what's fascinating is that the president is basing his decisions on who to pardon, and this goes back long before any of this stuff, but, who to pardon based on loyalty to him. And this concept of family loyalty, or omerta, might work great in The Godfather and in all kinds of mob movies, but it doesn't really work in criminal justice that way. Defendants, targets, subjects of investigations all have a huge incentive to cooperate with law enforcement to lessen their sentence. And all this talk about how Manafort potentially, he wasn't going, he was a strong man, was I think what Donald Trump had said. Well, yeah, he's a strong man also cooperate with the government because they have a huge incentive to do so. And you'll continue to see this potentially if Mueller's probe ends up reaching more people in the White House. We know, who's particularly close to the president that could potentially be a subject of this. And so, right.
What did it say to you, Elliot, just to stay with you for a moment, that part of what Manafort's lawyer said was that he did it in part to protect his family, sort of almost implying their safety? What did that say to you?
It could potentially be safety. That's an issue, and there's certainly ways to protect witnesses and their families. A big part of that was the financial matters he had to do to protect some of his family. So, for instance, he turned back, or he relinquished some real estate, but also was able to keep some bank accounts. And I think ultimately that was in order to protect his family. Now, had he been convicted, a lot of that may have been taken away, and he would have lost a lot of control over, again, the assets questions, the personal liberty questions as to whether, they're not going to enter the witness protection program, but potentially it's not his call as much. And so, again, this gets back to that incentive point. He had a huge reason to go ahead and do this, and you'll continue to see this as more people continue to be targets and subjects of this investigation.
And Jennifer, maybe that's just where my mind went, just because we've seen so much danger associated with people who turn, against Russia. Earlier in an earlier panel, Danny Savallo suggested that maybe the evidence that Paul Manafort might turn over in hopes of still getting a pardon may be more damaging to Russians than it would be to Donald Trump. That's not a prospect that's without danger, given who is running the Kremlin.
Absolutely. You can ask Mr. Skirple and his daughter. I think part of what was going on here was a concern for safety. In fact, he used the word safe in that one-line statement put out by his attorney. So I'm sure they're concerned. And although maybe we in the United States were looking forward to hearing about how the Kremlin-backed Ukrainian president and Ukrainian party that was pro-Russia manipulated this guy, the Russians sure didn't want to hear that. And I think his incentive was, frankly, not to testify in open court for exactly the reason that you're pointing out. I also want to say that the pardon is of much lesser value because there are probably a whole lot of state crimes. And when he listened to that lawyer for 40 minutes and then said, I'm guilty, some of those crimes arguably are state offenses as well. And so if he does chicken out on this, if he does clam up, he has state liability as well.
Virtually all of the banking ones could potentially be brought in a state court.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the lobbying stuff, not as much, but the banking stuff, totally.
Yeah, and it would be right in his home state of New York, where there are unfriendlies at every prosecutorial level, including the likely next attorney general. I want to play for you the defense that Donald Trump is down to and his remaining defenders. And Rudy Giuliani, his TV lawyer, trotted this one out on Hannity's show on Fox on Friday.
The plea agreement and the cooperation agreement has nothing to do with the Trump campaign. The reality is no evidence of collusion. All you have to do is look at the plea. The plea is to crimes that have to do with Manafort's past. No involvement with President Trump, no involvement with the campaign, no involvement with Russia.
Jonathan Capehart, aside from the fact that one of the apartments that Manafort relinquished is in Trump Tower, and the fact that his client was the Ukrainian government that he helped to get, ramrod in, the pro-Russia Kremlin government. The flip of that RNC plank on Ukraine. The idea this has nothing to do with the campaign sounds patently absurd to me. Does it to you?
Yes. Look, you described Rudy Giuliani correctly. He is President Trump's TV lawyer. He's the mouthpiece, literally the mouthpiece of Donald Trump. These are all words that you can imagine him barking into Rudy Giuliani's phone, telling him, say this on television, go on Hannity, say this on television, right down to all the words that come out of Rudy Giuliani's mouth. So yes, it's patently absurd. And the other thing about Rudy Giuliani's statements on television, if you take them in their totality, they're all sort of short-term analysis. So what you just showed there, well, yeah, right now, today, there might not be literally the words collusion in any of the documents, but it also belies the fact that Mueller isn't playing Uno. He's not playing checkers. This guy is playing four-dimensional chess. Yeah, you might not see it now, but the guy is like 10, 20, 30 million steps ahead of the president and his TV lawyers. So whenever Rudy Giuliani goes on television, I listen very carefully because it really is like the perfect barometer, the perfect temperature of where the president is in his sort of mental mania over what's happening to him.
Yeah, the rest of my panel is going to stay with me, but I wanted very quickly before we let Elliot Williams go. Can you guess who the next target might be? Who might Manafort be giving up? Who's in the most danger, maybe?
Well, but again, look, we know now, we are now in the room in Trump Tower in 2016. That meeting where they talked about during Hillary Clinton. We know that Jared Kushner was there. Now, to say he's the next person, I don't know. There's a lot of people in the White House and so on. But it's hard to believe that potentially Mueller could not get to more individuals in that room. Because like you said, those are the folks who have the secrets. I'd like to say those, the folks, it's not really where the bodies are buried, but it's certainly where the secrets about potential interaction with a foreign government and potential collusion, that's where that's buried.
It's the room where it happened.
It's the room where it happened.
There. You didn't want to be in the room where it happened because that's the room where all the next targets could be.
The question is, who's Aaron Burr in this?
I don't even want to speculate, but I know he was a great singer in Hamilton. Elliot Williams, thank you very much. Karine, Jonathan, and Jennifer will be back with us. And next up, Trump's.
Well, I think Puerto Rico was incredibly successful. I think that Puerto Rico was an incredible, unsung success. I think in a certain way, the best job we did was Puerto Rico, but nobody would understand that.
At least 7 people are dead due to Hurricane Florence, which is still wreaking havoc over the Carolinas as a tropical storm. And yet, Donald Trump can't stop relitigating his and his administration's inadequate response to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico last year. On Thursday, Trump did something that was shocking, even for him, actually denying that nearly 3,000 people died and falsely blaming Democrats for inflating the death toll to make him look bad. And after being corrected on the death toll numerous times, Trump doubled down last night, rage tweeting that Puerto Rico's death toll rose, quote, like magic, and that there was no way it was accurate. Karine, Jonathan, and Jennifer are back with me. Joining the discussion now, Republican strategist Caton Dawson. Caton, what do you make of the President of the United States, stunningly, pretending that 3,000 people didn't really die as a result of Hurricane Maria?
Well, that's a tough question, especially from storm-infested South Carolina in the middle of a hurricane. And the federal government and the state government is doing a wonderful job, and the resilient 5.3 million people, along with the Cajun Navy, are weathering a pretty strong storm here. So to address the president's comments, I'll just let them stand as they may. I don't know the figures. I do know that the population of Puerto Rico is a little over 3 million people. I do know they're still in distress. I have friends that have gone to work in Puerto Rico, and certainly wish them the best as a territory of the United States of America, and with people there who work hard and are trying their best. I don't know what the figure is of the death toll. If it's more than one, it's sad and tragic.
But we do know the figures. I mean, we still do have some processes in government that are, even despite Donald Trump still functioning. And official governmental figures were put out. Even Paul Ryan, who has made the shrug, you know, he's like a shrug emoji, you know, in human form, because he doesn't, nothing Donald Trump does will elicit a response from him. Even he couldn't defend Donald Trump on this. Here's Paul Ryan on Thursday.
The casualties don't make a person look bad. That's not. So I have no reason to dispute these numbers. I was in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. It was devastated. This was a horrible storm. I have no reason to dispute those numbers. Those are just the facts of what happens when a horrible hurricane hits an isolated place like an island.
I mean, even Rick Scott, who back when he was a hospital executive, pretended he couldn't remember any of the record Medicare fraud that was happening in his, you know, when he took a deposition. Even he on Thursday says he disagrees with Trump. An independent study said thousands were lost, and Governor Rosselló agreed. I've been to Puerto Rico. He has to throw that in to try to help himself out in his election. The loss of any life is tragic, etc. So Caton, I mean, literally, it is not disputable that 3,000 people died, right?
I would say when Paul Ryan says the same thing, it's not disputable. The sad and disappointing thing is the president's bringing it up again in the middle of a marvelous job that the federal government's doing in 2 states now. So I guess we move on past the comments and talk about the current storm if we can.
Yeah. No, what you say, I don't think we can move on past them. Let me, Jennifer, let me let Karine first and then Jennifer. Karine, jump in.
I'm going to say this, and I've said this before in your show, Joy, because it seems to fit for almost every segment that I do with you, which is never has such a small man taken such a big job. And Donald Trump is just has no moral compass here. How could you deny 3,000 souls, 3,000 Americans who died because of the incompetence of this Trump administration? That is the reality that we're in, and we should not have a president who is saying it didn't happen when we all know it happened. But the thing about it, Joy, is, okay, so Paul Ryan is saying that he believes it happened. He went down to Puerto Rico. And where are the oversight hearings? Do your jobs. You know, why aren't we not talking about this every day? Why aren't we not bringing the administration to committee hearings and asking what happened and just, you know, going down the checklist? Because we're talking about 3,000 lives, and they're just not doing their jobs. They're not holding him accountable, and they're sticking up and saying, oh, they don't believe what he said, but they need to do their jobs. 3,000 people died.
Yeah. Jennifer Rubin.
Listen, the reason we have a Donald Trump problem is because otherwise good and decent people like Kate and Dawson won't call him out and won't condemn him. Donald Trump has killed those people twice. Once through neglect and oversight, and secondly, disgracing that they died at all. And that's what death denial, that's what Holocaust denial, that's what all these denial syndromes are all about, is killing the person twice. Listen, even Paul Ryan would admit this. But what we have here is a perfect example of the different ways in which the Republicans couch and add caveats and protect Donald Trump. Paul Ryan, the first thing he said was, no one's responsible. It's no one's fault. Well, we don't know it's no one's fault. We would like to have some oversight hearings, as Corinne said. And the reason they're doing such a bang-up job, Caton, in North Carolina and South Carolina, is because those are Trump voters, just like they were in Texas. If they're not voters and they're not white, he doesn't give a darn. And that's what this is also about. These people are not recognizable as Americans, as human beings in his eyes. And I think, Caton, it would be a really good thing for you, the Republican Party, to condemn that explicitly.
Caton?
Well, let me explain. I mean, accuse President Trump of killing 3,000 people is irresponsible. And that's as if he made the storm hit the island. So at the end of the day, that sort of rhetoric isn't helpful to the situation.
Hold on. Let's have one person talk. Because, Caton, I think the point that's being made here is not, no one's saying that he personally killed these people, but the point is that I think it's indisputable at this point that the response to Hurricane Maria was very inadequate, and that had it been better, a lot of those lives might have been saved. And administration takes the blame. George W. Bush had to take the L for the poor response to Katrina. He had to own it. It would have been insane for him to come out and try to say that those people didn't really die who died as a result of Hurricane Katrina. In this case, Donald Trump is sort of doing what Alex Jones did with Sandy Hook and saying it didn't even happen at all. And the fact is, his administration was in charge. His administration failed those people. He threw towels at them. Isn't he responsible for the poor response to Maria?
Well, the president is responsible for the FEMA response and the national response, and the governors are responsible for the responses in their states. So at the end of the day, there is a responsibility. You know, politicians have the ability to take credit for good things and try to dismiss bad things. But the president's being held accountable this morning by his numbers.
I still didn't hear Caton condemning the president. I still, Caton, didn't hear you condemning the president for denying the death of 3,000 Americans. And that's why, in my view, the Republican Party is unrescuable. You have too many people who are too invested in defending this guy and not calling him out and not calling him to account. And you can't have a party in charge. You can't have a party in power that does that. It's totally irresponsible. It's morally and politically irresponsible.
I got to get Jonathan in, but I want to give Kate a chance to respond afterwards. Jonathan, let me let you in.
Joy, about a year ago, I think, I can't remember with time in the era of President Trump, that I wrote a piece that said that the one thing that President Trump lacks that his 44 predecessors had in abundance is a sense of shame. President Trump has shown time and time again that he lacks a sense of shame. Shame is the one human guardrail that we have that keeps us from doing things we shouldn't do or owning up and taking responsibility for things that we have done that have hurt people, that have denied people a sense of dignity and humanity. President Bush, George W. Bush, rightly was criticized for his initial response to Hurricane Katrina, but he went down there, he took responsibility for it, and he tried very hard, and the Congress and the White House tried very hard to make things right. President Reagan apologized to the country for what happened with Iran-Contra. This president, with a total lack of a sense of shame, is somebody who goes on Twitter as another hurricane is bearing down on the country to deny the fact that 2,975 people in Hawaii, Americans, died. What we look for when we have a president of the in Puerto Rico, what we look for in a president is someone who represents us, who is able to channel our pain and frustration when we are feeling hurt and vulnerable. 2,975 Americans on the island of Hawaii lost their lives. Their surviving relatives and friends and loved ones are still grieving over their loss, but also still dealing with the fact that their island their home is still devastated and they have been abandoned by their country. This president has shown no sense of shame in what happened to them, or even in taking responsibility and acknowledging the fact that as president of the United States, yeah, it's not technically your fault, but you are the leader. Say the government needs to take responsibility and be held accountable for what happened.
And you know, Kate, let me, you know, not that we're all picking on you, but, you know, in addition to, Jonathan says, you know, that shame is lacking, but it also feels like there's a certain empathy that Donald Trump doesn't seem to ever be able to exhibit. And one of the things we do expect from a president is that in moments of crisis, right? In my family, with my mother and my, you know, and sister and brother and I were not for Reagan at all. But when the Challenger thing happened, Reagan was able to speak to the country, whether you were for him or against him, with a certain level of moral authority. Donald Trump, I mean, you're down there in South Carolina. Should it get 7 people have already lost their lives. I can't imagine Donald Trump being able to speak to that loss in a way that would move anyone except a third of the country, the third of adults who already are devoted fans of his. Outside that 30%, where is his moral authority? And isn't he eroding it more and more and more every single day when he does things like deny the death toll in Puerto Rico?
Well, Donald Trump is a cold sort of president. I mean, he's not warm and fuzzy. His Twitter thing does bother a lot of us in the quick statements that are made, but at the end of the day, he won an election. He has some policies. We on the Republican side like the Supreme Court picks.
Is it worth it? Is it worth it, though? Is a Supreme Court? I mean, I know that the right wants to control the courts. I get that. But is that worth it? Because if the president can't speak to national, God forbid it gets worse in the region where you live, who will speak to the country? I mean, Paul Ryan as well. He literally is a shrug emoji. He decides he does not want to lead. He doesn't want to be a leader. He just wants to, you know, serve tea to Donald Trump. There isn't anyone, and your party runs the whole country, and there isn't anyone on that side that can speak to the country's heart. And does that bother you as a Republican?
Well, I come out of the Reagan-Bush wing, where there were. I felt both of those leaders were very compassionate leaders, especially 43. George W. Bush, and he led and was a responsible figure in the 9/11 tragedy when he addressed those. And do I wish the president was more empathetic? Yeah, but I can't change his personality, and I can't change the election.
You could withdraw your support. You guys could. The base of the Republican Party could withdraw its support from such a man, as many have. Jennifer Rubin is right there. She's not physically next to you, but she's next to you on the TV. She has. Many Republicans have said this isn't worth it.
I'm not one of those Republicans. I'm telling you, I understand campaigns, elections. I understand how the president got elected over 15 qualified politicians, and I understand where we are in America right now, and the midterms are going to give us a little signal about what's going to happen. There are going to be some surprises, but not as many as our panelists think. The country's changed, and whether it's for the good or the bad, the country is changing as we speak. These natural disasters usually are unifying matters for our country, much like when we're attacked by foreign nations and terrorists. So I wish the president would be more unifying in his tone, but at the end of the day, the resources are being delivered where they can. The responsibilities to the states are being addressed. This is not the last storm we're going to face in South Carolina, North Carolina, or any of these coastal states. And they're tragedies. So at the end of the day, I pray and hope that people will understand what's going on in our country, and we'll see how it works out. But if you're looking for the government to always do everything for you, then there's always going to be a lot of dissatisfaction.
Well, there's a few things we expect the government to do in national disasters. That's kind of their job. Wow. Jennifer Rubin, I got to let you in as a now former Republican. Your response?
You know, this is why we have Donald Trump, because people like Dayton don't have a sense of moral responsibility themselves. People in public life have a moral responsibility to speak out when their elected leaders and their own members of their party do things that are morally repugnant. They can't simply go along for the road. It's not an answer to all this, Kate, to say that, well, he was elected. Yeah, he was elected, but now he's doing very, very bad things. And you and other Republicans should be denouncing it. And frankly, we will have another election in 2020, and you guys are going to be out there supporting him against against challengers. My goodness, the reason that the Republican Party is headed for the ash heap of history is because you don't have any sense of moral shame, moral core. And it starts with people like you, Kaiten.
I have to let Kaiten respond before I let my other two panelists in. Very quickly, Kaiten. We don't have a lot of time.
You know, that's Jennifer's opinion, and if she does it, I know we're okay. But at the end of the day, if you're talking about calling a president out and moral authority and his personal habits, I mean, is that our job? No.
But it used to be. Wait. I'm old enough to remember the Republican Party being the arbiters of the morality of others on a consistent basis. Remember the moral majority? That was Republicans saying that they were the arbiters of morality. But well, anyway, we're out of time. I wish we had more time. We need more time. We need more time. I wish we could keep all of you guys around. Karine, Jonathan, Jennifer, thank you. Kaiten, stay safe. Thanks. We wish all the best, nothing but the best to you and your family down there in South Carolina. And please make sure to check out Jonathan's new call-in radio show. You can talk to him on the phone, on the radio. America on the Line on WNYC Monday through Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Check it out. Voters in Maine, meanwhile, are making Susan Collins extremely uncomfortable. More on that next. Allegations of sexual misconduct swirl around Trump Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. A crowdfunding campaign urging Republican Senator Susan Collins to vote against his confirmation has raised, get this, $1.3 million. The campaign says the money will go to her future opponent in 2020 if Collins votes to confirm Kavanaugh. Collins has blasted the campaign as an effort to, quote, bribe her. Collins and Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski are considered to be the two key votes who could determine whether or not Kavanaugh gets a lifetime seat on the court. Joining me now is Judd Legum, founder of the political newsletter Popular.info, writer and commentator Anousheh Hossain, and MSNBC legal analyst Paul Butler. Thank you all for being here. Judd, you wrote a piece on Popular Information on Monday that said the following. You wrote, Kavanaugh made a big mistake. Under friendly questioning from Senator Ted Cruz, he unambiguously revealed that he believes Roe was incorrectly decided and should be overturned. This should make it much more difficult, if not impossible, for Collins and Murkowski to vote for Kavanaugh. And yet Collins has seemed pretty, she's saying she's undecided, but she seems pretty decided. I don't know. What do you make of it?
Well, I think until she says she's going to vote one way or the other, I really applaud the people in Maine and elsewhere who are continuing to do what they can to make their voices heard. I think taking a step back from all of this, there's so much that goes on every day, but if Brett Kavanaugh is confirmed, no matter what happens to Donald Trump, whether he's impeached, whether he resigns, whether he loses re-election, it'll all be worth it to Republicans. This nomination has the ability to reshape the law, to reshape America for decades. Collins and Murkowski are trying to claim plausible deniability that Kavanaugh will work to overturn Roe v. Wade, and I think if you look closely at his testimony, which is what I did, it's really unambiguous. It's as clear as these things get.
Yeah.
And Collins and Murkowski should know that and should be held accountable for it.
Yeah, and they surely know it, Anousheh, that, you know, so they're trying to, Collins is trying to hang on this. Well, he said the magic word, stare decisis, to me. So he said he believes in precedent that, you know, but the campaign against her, I wonder what you make of it just as a tactic. This idea, you know, there have been some activists that have sent wire hangers to Senator Collins' offices, sent over 3,000 coat hangers were mailed to her office symbolizing back alley abortions that took place before they became legal. The really hard-pressed issue. You heard in that little campaign commercial by the people raising money, potentially to use against her, you're voting to kill me. I have a pre-existing condition if you vote for him. What do you make of these as tactics?
Well, I think it's interesting because the crowdfunding campaign almost sounds a little bit more like a threat than it does sound like a bribe. But I think it also really lays out if Republican women, you know, I think it's interesting because let's not forget that it was majority white, college-educated women that put Donald Trump in power. You know, are Republican women going to choose gender over party? You know, will they choose race over party? So I find that really interesting. But also, this is really going to test us to see how far we have come since Anita Hill. You know, do we believe women or not? Is Me Too going to change how we consider a SCOTUS nominee or not? So those are the things that I think at the end of the day we really need to focus on.
Yeah, well, I want to try to just go in a little bit more, Paul Butler, on Susan Collins, you know, her objection to this tactic of saying, if you don't vote no on Kavanaugh. We're going to use this money we've raised to defeat you in an election. To Newsmax, conservative online newspaper Newsmax, this is what Collins said. I consider this quid pro quo fundraising to be the equivalent of attempt to bribe me to vote against Judge Kavanaugh. If I vote against him, the money is refunded to the donors. If I vote for him, the money is given to my opponent for the 2020 race, she said. She emphasized this effort will not influence my vote at all, adding, I think it demonstrates new lows to which the judge's opponents have stooped. You're a former prosecutor. Is raising money against a politician a bribe?
Of course not. So federal bribery law makes it a crime to offer something of value to a government official in exchange for an act. And here, there's no quid pro quo. Senator Collins isn't getting anything. It's her opponent who receives the campaign contribution. But Joy, I get the concern about the role of money in politics, and that's kind of the ironic thing here. They're able to do this crowdsourcing because of a Supreme Court case called Citizens United, which greatly expanded the role of money in politics. It was a 5-4 decision. From everything we know about his jurisprudence, if confirmed, Justice Kavanaugh would further expand the role of money in politics. And so that might be a reason why Senator Collins might want to think about her vote for the Supreme Court justice.
Right, and Judge, you know, you've got all of these issues in place, whether or not Kavanaugh would protect Donald Trump, protect the president from any kind of investigation, which is on the table. You've got these issues about campaign finance, seems to be very much on the side of big money and corporations, issues about whether or not he would protect health care. But to your very point, on Roe, it seems not that ambiguous. He said stare decisis, but it really is almost sort of laughable to try to assert that he does not have an opinion on what should happen to Roe v. Wade. So I'm wondering if, as a tactic, zeroing in on that and on women and on the 2 women Republican senators, if you believe that that's a smart tactical move, if Collins doesn't seem moved by it right now.
Well, I think that's the only way to go. There's really only 2 Republicans whose vote seems at all in doubt. Maybe Jeff Flake, but I think we've watched that movie too many times. Yes. he also hasn't declared, but it's clear where he'll go in the end. Yeah. And it really does put them in a difficult position because they voted for Gorsuch, but Gorsuch was replacing Scalia, and so therefore the dynamics of Roe and abortion rights really weren't going to change no matter who you put in. To that slot. This is much different because you have Justice Kennedy, who was the swing vote. So I do think it makes sense. And also, what's important is that both Murkowski and Collins have said they do not intend to vote for a nominee that is hostile to Roe. And I think that is precisely the kind of nominee that Kavanaugh has shown himself to be, both prior to his testimony, but then also, very importantly, in his testimony, said all of the words that conservatives who'd be seeking to overturn Roe would want to hear. Yeah. It doesn't get any clearer than Kavanaugh makes it. Now, obviously, he didn't say explicitly, this is what I'm going to do. He wants to create this ambiguity because he knows he needs Collins and Murkowski's vote. So. But he really did lay out exactly how he would do it.
Yeah, and they've made that pledge if they mean it. I'm sorry, go ahead, Anusha.
I was just going to say that I don't understand why we're so desperate to give this man the benefit of the doubt, even if there's like a small grain of benefit of the doubt that we can give him. As Judd was saying, I totally agree. He has been very clear on where he stands on Roe. I don't think that Kavanaugh's stance is really up for debate. And I think that it's crazy that Collins is trying to, you know, just hold on to this like little shred that would give him any benefit of the doubt. I don't think that there is any. I don't think he deserves the benefit of the doubt. And I think he's very clear on where he stands on Roe.
Yeah, and you know,
even if he's telling the truth in a very formal, legalistic way, right, you could definitely reduce a woman's access to health care without formally overruling Roe versus Wade. It's very hard for a woman to get an abortion in Texas now. Again, Roe versus Wade hasn't been overturned, but the court has so greatly expanded the role of officials of the government in women's reproductive rights that it doesn't have to overturn Roe versus Wade in order to accomplish that mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And Anusha, I wanted to turn to these allegations against Kavanaugh, and I wonder what you can you prognosticate whether that would have some impact on Lisa Murkowski, who seems also to be weighing, by the way, these issues of whether whether or not Kavanaugh believes that Native Alaskans are actually indigenous people worthy of civil rights protections, which seems to be really weighing on her vote. But this issue of the allegations of a high school sexual assault, which of course I should remind people, Kavanaugh's issued a statement saying he categorically, unequivocally denies, saying he didn't do it at any time. But what do you think that those allegations might do to this process, particularly as regards these two women Republican senators?
Well, I think that's what I was, that was exactly the point that I was stipulating earlier. I think this is going to demonstrate to us if Me Too is going to change how we consider a SCOTUS nominee. And I also think that it's interesting that the question isn't if Kavanaugh is a nice guy. I feel like these allegations are, bringing up those the list of the 61 women who were like, oh, well, he was very nice to me. This isn't a question about Kavanaugh being a nice guy. It's a question of the fact if he violated consent and held a woman down or not. That's the question. So we really have to stay focused on that.
We are out of time. Thank you, Judd Legum, Anousheh Hossain, Paul Butler. Now that primary season is officially over, it's time to talk about the midterms. And many of the Democrats running for key seats are making their races about one issue. It's not Donald Trump, not impeachment or Russia or any of the many scandals in D.C. Nope. It's all about health care. Joining me now is Perry Bacon Jr., senior political writer at 538, which is now predicting that Democrats have a 5 in 6 chance of winning the House and a 1 in 3 chance of winning the Senate. But don't go by the polls, vote. All right, so Perry Bacon Jr., PBJ, it's so good to see you again.
Good to see you, Joy.
Excellent. So let's talk about these races, because you have these candidates who are using health care as their main issue. Is that why Democrats are moving to these wider spreads in terms of more likely to take back the House and the Senate, or is it really Trump?
I think it's a combination of both. I think that Trump's particular personal disapproval is high, and that helps. But also, we saw in the polling last year, one thing that made Trump's numbers go down a lot was when he talked about this Obamacare repeal. Joy, we talked about this a lot in 2010 and 2014. 2010, 2014, Democrats did not want to talk about health care at all. They wanted to avoid it at all times. This year, they're talking about it a lot. They're not using the word Obamacare, but pre-existing conditions is a key plank of Obamacare. And I think what you saw is that the moment Trump started talking about repealing Obamacare, the law got more popular. Today, a Kaiser poll out, 50% of people have a favorable view of the health care law. 40% have a disapproval of the health care law. And that's a big shift. And that was a big shift from 2016 when the law was more unpopular than it was popular.
And we've talked this a lot before, because once people actually have the insurance, it's different, right? It's different in theory, the idea of change, but once you've already got the insurance, the idea someone's going to take it from you is really unpopular. I want to go to a tell by Congressman Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, that I think was not helpful to his party that this came out on Wednesday. Take a listen.
We keep the House majority, which I think we will, and then you have to make sure that you have a big enough of a majority in the Senate to be able to pass health care reform. If we can go back to the pre-ACA situation where we had a risk pool so that people with pre-existing conditions could get affordable coverage, then the rest of the individual market, more insurers will come into the marketplace and we'll have more choices, more competition that can help bring prices down.
I mean that's why the Affordable Care Act was passed, because like 40 million people were uninsured under that system. He's literally saying, if we keep the House, we are going to take your insurance.
This is why you don't keep a lame duck as a speaker. The party does not want him saying this out loud. If you look at the Republican ads, they're talking about, the national anthem, culture issues. They're not talking about repealing Obamacare at all in their ads, because they know it's a terrible political message. So why Paul Ryan is talking about that, it tells you that he's thinking more about his future think tank career than he's thinking about maintaining the majority for the Republicans. I'm sure people will tell him, do not say that anymore, because it's not the party message. Even though that probably is actually true. I do think if the Republicans have the control of the House, they'll push for this repeal again, because they'll have the numbers. The Senate may be more Republican than it is right now next year. So I think they will do that, but it was a major gaffe to say it out loud.
Major gaffe to say it out loud. And let's just look at the top issues for the voters in the midterms. Immigration is #1, and that doesn't mean people want a wall. That means a lot of people are concerned about it. Healthcare is #2, right up there. Look at the economy down at the bottom. That isn't helping Trump at all, that the Obama economy is still working.
yeah, the Republicans have talked a lot about how the economy is going to save them, but look at what they're actually doing. If you watch their ads in race after race, very few of the ads mention the tax cuts.
Yep.
Some mention the economy. They talk a lot about immigration, the wall, the kind of cultural issues that they think are really going to help them this fall.
Yeah, and none of it's helping right now. Thank you, Perry Bacon Jr. Great to see you, man. Have a great weekend.
Good to see you, Joy. Thank you.
And that is our show for today. AM Joy will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. But before we go, I have to say a happy birthday to my cousin, Nigel Carroll. Nigel's birthday is today. He's having his big birthday in Atlanta. I wish I was there, Nigel. All my cousins are down there. I'm like the cousin left out. There are only 2 or 3 of us didn't make it down because I got to work. I work on weekends. Love you, Nigel. Happy birthday. I hope it's the best one ever. Have about 2 or 3 cocktails for me, because we appreciate it. And Alex Witt is coming up next. Thank you.